Alright, welcome to the second video from the second module in the Ultimate ZSpheres Guide course. Now, in the previous video, we basically set up our project, loaded our image as a reference with a spotlight. I gave you a quick introduction to that, and we saved our first tool or our first iteration of the tools that we're going to use. And we have the ZSphere that we have in the screen. Now, in this video, we're going to concentrate on building what is called an armature using the ZSpheres. And I'm going to get to that in just a second, but basically that's going to provide the basis to build the character and to add things to the character in the next lessons and in the next modules. So let's go ahead and go into full screen mode. All right, and this is basically where we left off. We have our custom UI, everything else, and this is our current tool, which is just a ZSphere. So before we do anything, let me just give you a quick introduction of what a ZSphere is, because it is a very particular and very unique concept that it is a ZSpheres thing, so you won't find this anywhere else. And the idea with this ZSphere is that it allows you to very quickly create the volumes and the basis for the mesh itself before you actually start sculpting. So this is not a mesh, so you cannot sculpt in it. You cannot, edit it in a way that you would do with any normal sketch. But what you can do is actually scale it, move it, rotate it, and add sections to it. So the best example or analogy that I can come up with is if you're familiar with clay modeling. So in clay modeling, or like more traditional approach, if you want to create a character, you need an armature or a structure so that you can attach the pieces of clay, right? So you, let's say, you will have a character like that, and this is wired. So it's like a stigma figure, basically, but this could be, wire that sort of twist around itself just to give it a bit more strength, right? And then you have maybe the fingers, and so on and so forth. But this is essentially wire if you're doing, clay modeling. And then you have pieces of clay. I'm just going to do it with different color here. Right? And then you start attaching pieces of clay. And little by little, you start to build the volume for the character. And that is going to give it the, the right the right shape and the right volumes of the character. So ZSpheres allows you to do something similar to the wire or to the structural part of the modeling, right? What's great about the ZSpheres though is that it allows you to, pretty much like you would do with clay, you can reposition the character once you have the armature, or reposition the armature before you move any further. So if you want to change the pose, I'm just going to do it with a different color here. You can take this leg, right? And I can just move it like that, using ZSpheres, and this will be, obviously, the leg won't be there anymore. And then you have this leg in a different pose or in a different way, and then you can use your clay or digital clay and start adding some volumes, and then you have a completely different character, right? So this is kind of like the power of the ZSpheres, and the simplest way to think about it, like if this is a bit messy, with this analogy of the clay modeling, the simplest way to think about it is to create armatures. So to create armatures that then you can start adding volume to it. So a ZSphere is essentially what you can see here, right? And then you can create new ZSpheres. So I can just create a new one. I'll get to that in a second, but just to try to give you an example. So I can create as many ZSpheres as I want, right? And ZSpheres, once I click and drag and add them in the way that I'm going to show you, ZSpheres is going to automatically attach them together, right? So you can have, if you want to do a tree, for example, you can start like this, and then in this one you can add another one and branch out like so. So it's a very powerful way to create the armature. But now this is going to be just the armature. You won't be able to sculpt in it. But because you have the volumes right, then, and that's what basically we're going to do, we can take this and convert it into a mesh that follows the same volumes as the armature. So once we convert this to a mesh that we can work with, then we can simply start adding volumes, sculpting, moving things around, and so on and so forth. But generating this shape is going to be very, very easy if we use the the ZSpheres. So that's part of the reason I want to show you this, because I reckon it's one of the easiest way to create a good looking base mesh, a controlled way to create a good volume with the ZSpheres, but also because it's a very unique concept in ZBrush. So I just want to give you all the weird stuff first so that at least you know they're there. And as we progress in the course, things will start to actually make more sense. So that's why I wanted to start you with the weird stuff first. And again, this is a unique concept in ZBrush. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to start creating the base of our character, and this sphere right here is going to be the equivalent to the belly, okay? And it's important to establish this or know that we are talking about the belly first, because we need to create the hips and the chest with a ZSphere on top and at the bottom, okay? So in order to create a ZSphere, if I hover over the ZSphere, I'm going to make sure that I'm in edit mode, as you can see here. Right? I'm going to click and drag. So that will create the next ZSphere. All right? And you'll see there is a connection in here. So this is the connection that ZBrush automatically makes. And if you're familiar with other 3D applications, you might recognize this shape here as a joint. Right? But this is not a joint. It's just a way to understand that this basically is the center of this ZSphere, and this one is the center of the second sphere that we just dragged in. All right, so I'm going to clear this out. So basically, in order to create another one, I can just click and drag, and depending on how much I drag, that's going to determine the size of the ZSphere. All right, so that is basically creating a new one. Now we have the move, scale, and rotate switches here, which are the equivalent to pressing the letter W, E, and R in your keyboard. So if you hover over these switches, you will see ZBrush gives you the shortcut there. So W for move, E for scale, and an R for rotate. So for example, if I select the move one, I can now click the ZSphere and move it around, and I can reposition this one as well. Try to not to move the original one. This is going to be the base or the origin of this armature. So try not to move this one. You can if you want to, but for the sake of creating the character, we're gonna leave this one as it is. So you can just go ahead and start doing this, right? Move things around. If you actually click the connection between the ZSpheres, you can do a little bit of a rotation, right? If you select the scale one, I just select the scale there. I can click and drag just to make it smaller. And you can actually create new ZSpheres in between other ZSpheres. So if I move this one around here, right, and I want to create some kind of, I don't know, a tail or something like this, I can go to draw, right? And draw allows me to draw new ZSpheres, right? So it's either move, scale, rotate, or draw. And the shortcut for draw is Q. So I can click a couple of times in here, and I just added 3 new ZSpheres. Now, this happened, and I'm happy that this happened right now. I was expecting it to do it later, but now that this is here, I just want to mention that sometimes when you have 2 spheres that are pretty big and pretty close together, creating kind of like this intersection with each other, this is going to tell you that there might be a problem here. So try to avoid this dotted area. And the way that we can fix this is by moving things around or scaling the ZSpheres. So I'm going to take the move tool, click on this one, and push it upwards. So you'll see as soon as I go out of this range, now it is fixed. But I can simply move things around, right? And that is dealing with the armature or editing the armature. Now this armature also works with hierarchy. So the first connection between this ZSphere and this ZSphere, which is this one, I can click and move it, and it's going to affect anything that is after that. So between this area and this area, right? So if I select the move brush and just affect this area, anything that is, let's say that this is connection 1, connection 2, 3, 4, and 5. 2, 3, 4, and 5 will be affected when I move the first one. If I just move number 5, because this one is the last one in the chain, this area is the only one that will be affected. So let me give you an example. With the move one selected, I click this last connection. I'm just moving the connection between this sphere and this one. But if I select this the first connection, and I actually move it, you'll see I'm actually moving everything with it. Okay, so it is very useful and very handy. Just be aware of that hierarchy in the ZSphere. Now I can also use the rotation that I haven't used. So I can click here and rotate, right? So that's how you can very quickly reposition. If this was, I don't know, a finger, an arm, or something like that, you can reposition this and start rotating things around. Now, obviously, it's important to keep rotating in different ways, like changing the camera. So just to make sure that the rotation is the way that you want to or that you're expecting it to be. And at the end, we can just convert this into a mesh and start sculpting it. All right. Now, I'm going to delete ZSpheres and I'm going to show you how you can delete ZSpheres, because we basically need to start working on the armature for the character. And for that, we're also going to use symmetry. So I'm going to select draw again. And I have already introduced you to one of the key modifiers in ZBrush, which is the letter Alt. And this is a very important modifier because it's going to invert whatever action you're performing. So if you press the letter Alt when using ZSpheres and you have the draw selected, right? So normal click will add a new ZSphere. Alt is going to delete it. Okay, but just remember, this Alt key is going to be an essential modifier for a lot of the things in ZBrush. So in this case, in this particular case, when you press Alt and click on one of the ZSpheres that you have already created, it's going to delete it. So let me show you that. So I'm going to press Alt and let's go ahead and delete this one. And you'll see now the connection becomes this larger one. So I can delete this one, for example, and this connection will be created. So Alt, click, and that's how you can delete. So I'm going to delete all of this and go back to the single one. All right, so that's kind of like a quick overview of how to manipulate and how to deal with ZSpheres. But now let's go ahead and actually build something that we can use. All right, so we have our base ZSphere right in the middle, and we know that it's right in the middle because if I look at it from the bottom, you'll see these lines that I mentioned in the previous video. They indicate the where the ZSphere is pointing at. Now, actually, before we do anything else, I want to make sure that you understand the way that ZBrush deals with the coordinates. So we have the y-axis, we have the x-axis. Well, in ZBrush it's actually inverted, so let's do it properly. We have the x-axis pointing that way, and the blue or z-axis pointing forward. So whenever you work with a character, I would recommend, and this is kind of like a standard practice, and I recommend is the best way to do it, make sure that the character is always facing the z-axis. Okay, so the eyes of the character will be looking towards this area, and you can tell by this line here. It's a little bit faint here, but if you get closer, you will see it in there. And therefore, if the head or the eyes of the character are looking forward, so the arms would be on the positive x and the negative x. So in other words, you'll have one of the arms going this way and another one this way. So this one will be in the negative x, this one will be in the positive x. Right? And this is what is going to allow us to play with symmetry and work really, really fast. All right? So I just want to do a quick intro to that. Cool. So now we know what these lines are for. Let me just get closer to make sure that you see them, this blue one and this red one. So now we know that the character is sort of facing this way, or this sphere is facing this way, and you can work in these two sides. Now, if I enable symmetry, I'm going to click on this switch from the custom UI. Now I can hover over the ZSphere and you'll see two little dots that appear on top. All right. And I want to mention this because it's pretty important to understand. Here are the two dots, right? And they're indicating that this is where I have my cursor. But then you have this second cursor, which is actually the brush size. So with this, we know that we're going to start adding on this side of the ZSphere, right? And there's going to be also a third thing that you will realize. So the virtual line in the middle, that is allowing ZBrush to work in a symmetrical mode, you will see it represented with a green dot. So when you get closer to the middle line, ZBrush is going to automatically snap to a green dot. And when you see a green dot, right? When you see it, and I'll show you just in a second, it's basically telling you that you can place a ZSphere here, and it's going to be right in the middle. Okay, so let's just see a practical example of that. So I'm going to hover over right? I'm not doing anything at the moment, just hovering over, and I get closer to the middle line, and there you go. So that's the snap. So when you have this green dot, that means it's right in the middle. And this is super important because that's how we're gonna make sure that we can create the chest. So let's go ahead and do that. So here at the top of the ZSphere, I'm gonna wait until this snaps to the center, click and drag, and I'm gonna do something like this. All right, let's go ahead and do the same thing for the hips. So at the bottom, make sure that it's green, click and drag. And now we have 1, 2, and 3. Now, what's important about this first step is the following. I'm just going to clear this out and very quickly show you this. So you'll see the root one, or the first ZSphere, has this join or this indication pointing downwards, right? And it will be the same thing, but pointing upwards for the chest, indicating that this one right here is the origin of the ZSphere, right? And this is very important because what I mentioned at the beginning, that this works with a hierarchy, right? So if we don't do this, the problem is that when you want to, for example, move the legs independently from the body, just to reposition the character, and this is not in this way, you move a leg and then the rest of the character is going to be moved. Whereas if we leave it like this, it's kind of like creating a boundary or creating a limit. So from this point, anything that we move is going to affect whatever is below, and the same thing for the top. That's why it's important to do it this way. It is not absolutely necessary. I just think it is a much better practice, and it's better to work a little bit faster. So let's clear that out. Oops. And we have our base ready. So now let's go ahead and use the symmetry. So with the symmetry activated as well, and although I just added a single sphere at the top and at the bottom, it is important to have symmetry activated. Otherwise, we might add a single sphere, but it's not going to be right in the middle. So it's important to do that with symmetry activated. So I'm going to do the hips of the character. So I'm going to go on the side, click and drag, right? And let's do the same thing for the shoulders. So click and drag. All right, it's looking good, like a pillow, but we're getting there. And let's go ahead and do the feet of the character. So I'm going to click and drag, right? That's going to be the feet. And let's go ahead and do the wrist as well. So I'm going to click and drag. All right, so this is pretty short. So what we can do now is switch from draw to move and start manipulating these shapes so we can move the character into place. So I'm going to click move, and let's go ahead and move a little bit further away. And I'm going to click and drag to pull this down. So with this one is going to determine the length of the legs. So let's go ahead and do that as well. This is going to be the arms. And just at this point, I just want to show you something very quickly that is also very important in the long run, kind of like in the workflow. So when you're working with characters, whether they're symmetrical or not, you generally speaking have two options. You have an A pose, and then you have a T pose. And these are just poses, or the names of poses, that allow you to work either a little bit faster in terms of adding details and working in ZBrush, but also if you want to export the character to a different application and, let's say, rig the character for animation, that sort of thing, it's important to keep the character in these poses. So we're not going to get obviously into animation because ZBrush is not for animation, but I just want to give you, the best practices and all that. So the difference between an A pose and a T pose is essentially the shape of the letter. So basically, if I move this one like that, now this character will be in a T pose. Essentially, this is the T pose. I know this, you might be familiar with that already. This is pretty basic, but this is the T pose, right? And if I go ahead and change this like that, a little bit more relaxed pose, then that is called the A pose, just because of the shape of the arms, sort of like pointing down. Okay, so I generally speaking work with the A pose. I prefer to work with a more relaxed, shape or more relaxed pose. But again, this is a little extra tip there. All right, so let's go ahead and reposition the arms, and we can have a look at it from the side view. And here's where I want to show you something else. So if you're trying to find the exact side view, it might be a little bit hard to find the right side view. So I'm going to introduce you to the next modifier. So we talked about the Alt key, but I'm also going to show you the Shift key. So with the Shift key, you can snap to the different angles of the cameras, which is super handy in this specific process. So the way that you do that is very simple. You start rotating around. So right click, rotate, and without letting go of the rotation, just press Shift and you can just keep moving and it will just snap to the different views. So let me just do it one more time. Click and drag to start rotating and then pressing Shift and it will just snap to the front or to the side, whatever is your closest in terms of the rotation. So if I want to see it from the front, which currently is this side, I just start rotating and then press Shift and there we go. Okay, so that's how I snap the view to the side view. All right, so I can just go ahead from this view and arrange maybe the hips as well, lower them as well. Maybe the chest is a little bit too forward, the shoulders as well. Maybe push the wrist a little bit forward as well. And this is just already tweaking the armature. Okay, which is pretty simple. All right, now let's go ahead and add some knees and elbows. So I'm going to go to Draw, and I'm going to click in between these two. All right, so we have some elbows and some knees. And of course, we need to do the neck. So I'm going to make sure that I'm right in the middle. Click and drag. That's going to be the beginning of the neck. And let's do another one for the end of the neck. Right? And then we can go to the Move brush, or move tool, not the Move brush, the Move tool, and rearrange these things. In this case, I also want to show you something else. You'll see that there is a ZSphere in here, but it's not visible just because of the size of this other ZSphere and the size of the new one. But if you hover over this ZSphere, you'll see a little circle that appears right in the middle, and that indicates that the ZSphere is there, and you can just click on that and move it. So if I hover over this one, you'll see the yellow circle, and I can click on that, and then I can manipulate it. And that's how you can just change this. All right, let's go ahead and move this a little bit so that it makes sense. The placement of this, if you want to move the whole arm from the root of the arm, in this case the shoulder, you can click on the shoulder and do this type of thing, right? And this is why I was mentioning at the beginning that if you don't have the setup in the way that I show you, as soon as you start moving things here or in the legs, it's going to affect the whole armature. So that's why the center of the root of the armature is right in the middle, in the belly. Okay, so that's basically it, right? That covers very briefly the way that you can create an armature. So you have the Draw mode where you can create a new ZSphere. Then you have Alt-click to delete that ZSphere. You have the Move brush to move the actual individual ZSpheres or the connections in between. You have the Scale, which allows you to scale, the ZSpheres, right? And we can very quickly change the entire look of this character by making it a bit more skinny, just by scaling these the ZSpheres, which is actually what I'm intending to do. And then you have the Rotate option that allows you to rotate from a single pivot or a single sphere. Okay, you can actually rotate the sphere. And for that, I just want to do one extra one. You don't have to do this one. This is just to give you an example of how the rotation affects the single sphere. So I'm just going to do a simple thing here. Again, you don't have to do this. Let's say that this guy has a thumb, right? This is a big thumb. If you go to Rotate and you click in the middle, you're actually rotating the entire forearm. But if you actually want to create the pronation of the wrist, you can click on the wrist itself, right? Or you can click on the shoulder. So if I click on the shoulder, it allows me to do this type of thing, right? So click and drag, and it's just rotating around the pivot. So in other words, very briefly, clear this out. If you have a cylinder like that, and here you have your ZSphere at the beginning of this cylinder, if you click and drag using the Rotate tool from the ZSphere, ZSpheres is going to try to rotate based on that as if it was the pivot, right? So rotate around. That's why I wanted to add this thumb so that it will be more obvious, but hopefully you get the idea. So I'm gonna delete this one, go to draw, alt click. All right, so I think we can move forward now that we know the basics of how to create the armature, and we can go ahead and refine this a little bit. Now, we're not going to worry too much about the hands because we're going to do that with a separate tool and a different feature, and we're going to attach it and all that. And this particular character doesn't really have feet. I think that's kind of like part of what makes it cute. I don't know. In terms of design, I just decided to go without the feet. But if you wanted to have feet, you can just add one. I mean, it's as simple as just dragging, create a new ZSphere, just move these ones forward, and now you have feet. And of course, we will tweak the shapes later, but because of the shape of the character, I think it works nicely without feet. It's kind of like some stumps or like part of the roots or something like that. But anyway, so that covers the creation of the armature and the editing. So what I'm going to do now is jump into a time lapse, which is essentially, it's a repetitive action. It's going to be doing the same thing that I just showed you. But all I'm going to do is use the move, the scale, and the rotate tools to adjust the position and the shape of the armature. Okay, so I'm going to try to get something closer to what I think would be good for this character. But this is going to be a time lapse because I'm not going to be teaching you anything new. I'm just going to repeat the same process, moving, scaling, and rotating to adjust. And just as a quick recap, you can move around, and while you rotate around and you hold shift, it will snap to this side view. One thing that I forgot to mention that is quite important is that right now I have the perspective off, meaning that when I snap to the front view or to the side view, is also is showing me this in kind of like an orthographic view. So there's no perspective. If you for some reason can see a little bit of the grid, or you can see part of the legs, when you get to a side view, it indicates that this is not in perspective. So if you want to turn that on or off, and at this point that we're building the armature, I would recommend that you have perspective off. You can go to the draw palette, right? And this is, remember, the palette that we use to turn on and off the floor. So we have another one that is called the perspective. And you'll see the distortion of the perspective. So if I have perspective on and rotate around and press shift, this is the side view of the character, but you can see there is perspective. So let's go ahead and turn that off. And there we go. All right, so that's something that I should have mentioned. But if you initialize ZBrush and then you have the custom UI that I sent, you should have this project as with perspective off. All right, and just before I jump into the time lapse, I just think that maybe we could add another ZSphere here for the wrist. So I'm going to click and add another one. Just going to move it a little bit so that you can see what's happening. Remember, we don't have to worry too much about the hands. We're going to do that afterwards or anything else. And I want you to focus on the overall shapes and the overall volume of this armature. One thing that is important to mention with the armature is that this is the part of the body that is going to be inside the character. So, or sort of like defining what the character looks like underneath. So this is what we're trying to do at this point. Okay, that's what we're trying to do with this armature based on the concept. So keep in mind that this is going to be underneath. So there's going to be elements that are going to be outside, like the pants or the little skirt or that sort of thing, and that's going to add volume to the armature. So if you do something that looks, very thick, then when you start adding more volume and adding pieces, you end up with a very chubby, character. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to undo all this, right? Because I also want to mention something else. Let's do it with red. So with this armature, when you're creating this, avoid creating hands or try to take into account that it finishes around this area, not the hand, right? Also the head. So we're just doing up to the neck. So the neck is going to, the head is going to be a separate thing. This is just going to be the beginning of the neck. All right, so with that out of the way, I'm going to jump into the time lapse to edit and refine the position of the ZSpheres to create the armature. All right, so this is the result of the quick tweaking and editing of the armature, and you'll see very quickly we have something that already resembles like the body of a character. Of course, we haven't actually started sculpting or anything else, but it gives you a good idea. And this is why I wanted to introduce you to ZSpheres first, because it is a very quick way to get something going really quickly, and then you can play around with a bunch of different body proportions and that sort of thing. So for me, it's very easy to, using this technique, just scale from the shoulders and make something, you know, like a very bulky character with big arms. I'm going to undo that with Control Z, but the same thing for the head. You know, it's very easy to manipulate and very easy to create something that looks visually appealing, at least from the point of view of a silhouette. So just to wrap up this video, because this is pretty much done, I want to show you a couple more things. So once I'm happy with the overall shape, I can go ahead and refine the volumes and the size of these volumes if I wanted to. So let's say this character has a very thin arm, right? So, and this one is a little bit thicker. What I can do is create a couple of ZSpheres in between and scale them down. So I'm going to go to the Draw palette. I'm still with Symmetry activated. I'm going to click here. This is going to be the shoulder. I'm going to click on one, and then just below the elbow, or before the elbow, sorry, click another time. So we have now two ZSpheres, and I can go to the scale, and let's go ahead and scale just the ZSpheres, not the entire connection, because that would scale anything that is after that in terms of the hierarchy. So just click in the ZSphere and reduce it. Right? So now you can have an indication of what the deltoid might look like, for example, and the forearm and that sort of thing. So I can just scale that like so, and go to the move one, and just reposition this so that it looks a little bit better. But generally speaking, that's how I like to shape the beginning or the armature of my characters. Very easy, very quickly, and I can do changes. Again, I keep saying this, but it's true, right? Very quick and very easy to make changes, proportional changes, to make sure that what I'm doing is working fine. So I'm going to scale this a tiny bit more. Just, I think the arms are a little bit shorter. And scale this as well. And the reason I wanted to show you that as well is because you don't have to have a ZSphere per each joint. I mean, the ZSpheres are not specific to create joints. Like in this case, I have two extra ones in between the humerus, for example. So you can just have as many as you want to describe the shape that you want. If you want to accentuate the biceps, you can just create another one and then scale it and that sort of thing. So for now, I think this is okay. And we sort of covered the creation and editing of the ZSphere. And I just want to go back to the use of Spotlight in this case. So I want to clear this in a second. And hopefully you remember by now the quick shortcut for the Spotlight. We currently have Spotlight enabled. And because we already have Spotlight, I'm going to go ahead and bring in the editing of the Spotlight with the letter Z. All right, so now we have this toggle that allows you to move things around. So what I like to do, although this is not a front view, it's more like a 3/4 view, it gives me a good idea of the proportion. So I'm going to go ahead and move it around, and I'm going to click on this button, the scale one, click and drag to scale this a little bit, right? And it's just sitting on top of the armature. And then we can go ahead and select, let me just put it outside so that you can see what I'm going to do. The 1, 2, 3, 4, number 5 here, this icon is for opacity. So I'm going to click on that and reduce the opacity a little bit so that we can see through this image and we can see the armature. So let's go ahead and actually move things around a little bit. All right. And we can go ahead and press the letter Z to get out of this editing. All right. So now that we are out of this editing, we can still move things around. It's just that we have kind of like a watermark on top. And this is really good for, very quickly have a sense of the proportions of the character and see if it's working. And roughly, roughly it is working. You could rotate the arms a little bit, but I think the waist of the character, the shoulders, the length of the legs are pretty good, and they're matching this reference. So this is another way and very useful way to use the spotlight just to test things around. And in the future, when you finish this course and you want to work on your own character and you have a side view, a front view, you can just load all of them in all of those images into Spotlight and check things like I'm doing right here. All right, just to practice more about the use of Spotlight and manipulating Spotlight, let's go ahead and press the letter Z to bring back the editing. And I'm just gonna do it here just to show you. Spotlight, I'm gonna click on this opacity. So now I have full opacity again. And let's go ahead and reposition this, scale it. All right, something like that. Let's press Z again. And now we are back to what we had before. All right, I think I'm happy with this armature as it is. We have covered in this video everything that that I want you to know about ZSpheres at this point. We can create something from scratch very, very quickly, edit the shape. So creation of the armature, editing of the armature, and what a ZSphere is, it's all covered in this video. And we have now a solid base that we can convert into a mesh, and that's what we're going to do in the next video. And we can start working and editing and building our character. But as it is, we have something that looks pretty decent to me in terms of the silhouette and the appealing of the overall proportions of the character. And that's done all with the ZSpheres, nothing else, without sculpting, no brush involved. It's just a simple sphere. So let's go ahead and wrap this video by saving this as a new iteration of the tool. All right, that's pretty much it. So I'll see you in the next video.